The first thing I noticed was that my coffee tasted different. Not wrong, exactly, just different. A little more bitter than usual, with a faint chalky aftertaste that I kept telling myself was just the new brand Marcus had picked up from the store. I'd mentioned it to him once, casually, the way you mention that the weather seems odd or that your knee aches before rain. He smiled and said he'd grabbed a different roast by mistake and would get my regular one next time. That was 4 months ago. The taste never changed. I'm 67 years old. I buried my husband Gerald 2 years ago this past April. Pancreatic cancer 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors told us was merciful, though I'm not sure mercy is the right word for watching someone disappear that quickly. Gerald and I were married for 41 years. We raised 2 children in the same house in Lexington, Kentucky, where I still live, the yellow house on Birchwood Lane with the wraparound porch. Gerald built himself the summer our daughter, Carol, turned 10. After he was gone, the house felt like wearing a coat 3 sizes too big. Familiar, but wrong somehow. My son Daniel lives in Portland now with his family. Carol is in Charlotte. They both called every Sunday without fail, and I appreciated that more than they knew. But phone calls are not the same as a person sitting across from you at the kitchen table. I managed fine on my own. I want to be clear about that. I am not a woman who falls apart. I have never been that woman. But in November, 2 winters after Gerald died, I slipped on the back porch steps, ice, early in the morning, before I'd thought to salt them. I grabbed for the railing and caught it, but not before twisting my ankle badly enough that Dr. Patel wanted me off it for 3 weeks. No driving. Limited stairs. I live alone in a 2-story house. Suddenly, the logistics of being alone shifted from manageable to genuinely complicated. It was Gerald's nephew, Marcus, who called me the day after it happened. He'd heard through the family grapevine I'd mentioned it to Gerald's sister when she texted to check in, and word travels. Marcus was 34 at the time, between jobs, he said, just finishing up a contract position in Cincinnati that had ended earlier than expected. He offered to come stay for a few weeks, help with groceries and driving and whatever I needed. He'd always been pleasant enough at family gatherings. Gerald had liked him. I said yes without hesitating. That was my first mistake, though I didn't know it yet. Marcus arrived on a Friday with 2 duffel bags and a cheerful, easy manner that made the house feel less quiet. He cooked dinner that first night, nothing fancy, just pasta with jarred sauce and garlic bread, but he set the table and we ate together and talked, and for the first time since Gerald died, I sat in that kitchen and didn't feel the absence of another person like a physical weight. I felt grateful. I felt relieved. The weeks passed. My ankle healed. I told Marcus he was free to go, that I was perfectly capable now, and he said, and I remember this so clearly, he said, "Aunt Dorothy, you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house alone. Let me stay a little longer. Just through the holidays." The holidays were 6 weeks away. I said okay. Then the holidays passed, and it became through the winter, and then it was just understood that Marcus lived here now, and somehow I had not made a clear decision about that, but it had happened anyway. I want you to understand something about how this works, about how someone can live in your house for months while something is wrong and you do not see it. You don't see it because you are tired, because being tired is the first symptom and also its own explanation. I was sleeping 10, 11 hours a night and still feeling exhausted by noon. I assumed grief did that. I assumed being 67 did that. I assumed winter did that. When you are a woman of a certain age who has recently lost her husband, every doctor and well-meaning friend has already told you that fatigue is normal, that your body is processing, that you should be patient with yourself. And so I was patient with myself. I rested. I drank my coffee in the mornings, and I rested. My thinking began to go cloudy around February. Nothing dramatic, not confusion exactly, more like trying to read through a fogged window. I would start a sentence and lose the end of it. I put my car keys in the freezer once and laughed about it with Marcus, who laughed too and said he'd done the same thing last week. I forgot to pay the electric bill, which I had never once forgotten in 40 years of managing this household. These things scared me, but only briefly, before the tiredness pulled me back under. I mentioned to Carol on one of our Sunday calls that I felt like I was moving through water, and she said, "Mom, you need to sleep more." I didn't tell her I was sleeping 11 hours a night. I didn't want her to worry. The thing that finally made me pay attention was my pill organizer. I take 3 medications: blood pressure, thyroid, a low-dose aspirin. I've taken the same 3 medications for 6 years. Every Sunday I fill the little organizer myself. Always have, because I am particular about it. In early March, I went to fill it for the week and found it already filled, all 7 days. I stood in the bathroom holding it, trying to remember filling it, and couldn't. I went to the kitchen where Marcus was making breakfast and asked him if he'd filled it for me. He said he had. He said he'd noticed it was empty a few days ago and didn't want me to forget. He said it gently, with concern in his eyes, the way you might speak to someone you were a little worried about. I thanked him. I put the organizer in the cabinet. But something sat wrong with me for the rest of that day, something I couldn't name yet. I began to pay attention in the way you pay attention when you are afraid of what you might find, carefully, slowly, acting as though nothing has changed. I started watching Marcus in the kitchen. He was always helpful, always right there when I needed something, which I had read as kindness and now was starting to wonder about. He made my coffee every morning before I came downstairs. He brought it to me. He'd been doing this since he arrived, and I had let him because my ankle hurt, and then because it became routine, and because it is so easy to let someone take care of you when you are lonely and sad and grateful for the company. I stopped drinking the coffee one morning without telling him I'd stopped. I poured it down the sink when he left the room. I felt foolish doing it. I told myself I was being a paranoid old woman and that the next appropriate step was to schedule a therapy appointment, not to dump my coffee down the drain like a character in a movie. But I did it anyway. By the 3rd day of not drinking the coffee, I woke up and noticed something. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that stopped not by hearing something new, but by the sudden absence of something constant. I was awake. Genuinely, clearly awake, not fighting through a layer of cotton to reach the morning. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in months, like myself. I didn't say a word to Marcus. What I did instead was call my daughter. Carol answered on the 2nd ring. I told her I needed her to do something for me, and I needed her not to ask too many questions yet, and I needed her not to call Marcus or mention anything to Daniel until I said it was okay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, what's happening?" I told her I wasn't sure, that I might be wrong, that I hoped I was wrong. I told her I needed her to look into getting a small camera, the kind that looked like something else, something ordinary, a smoke detector or a clock. She was silent for longer this time. Then she said, "I'll overnight it." It arrived in a box addressed to me, marked as a kitchen timer. Carol had ordered a camera designed to look exactly like a smoke detector, wireless, with a memory card, motion activated. I installed it myself on a Wednesday morning while Marcus was out doing errands, standing on a step stool in the kitchen, hands shaking slightly. I pointed it at the coffee maker and the counter beside it. Then I went and sat in the living room and read my book and waited. I kept not drinking the coffee. Every morning I took the mug, said thank you, carried it to another room, and disposed of it quietly. I felt more awake with each day. I also felt something else growing, a dread that sat low in my stomach like a stone, because what I was doing meant that some part of me already believed something was very wrong. You don't hide cameras in your own kitchen because everything is fine. I checked the footage on the 5th morning, sitting at my desk upstairs with the door closed, watching on my laptop with my heart behaving strangely in my chest. Most of the footage was nothing. Marcus making eggs, Marcus washing dishes, the cat walking across the counter and sniffing at the fruit bowl. And then there was Wednesday morning, 7:14 a.m., 2 minutes before he called up to me that coffee was ready. I watched him take a small orange prescription bottle from the pocket of his sweatshirt. I watched him open it. I watched him tap several small white pills into his palm, 4 or 5 of them, and press them between 2 spoons until they were powder. And then I watched him stir that powder into my coffee. I sat at my desk for a long time, without moving. I want to tell you what it feels like to watch someone you trusted do that. Someone who sat across from you at dinner and asked about your day and helped you carry groceries and called you by the name your husband called you. There is a moment, and it lasted longer than I expected, where you simply cannot reconcile what your eyes are showing you with what your mind believed was true. The two things exist at the same time, and they cannot both be real, but they are. That is a particular kind of devastation that I don't have adequate words for. I kept watching the video and not crying, which I think is what shock looks like from the inside. Then I called Carol. She was at my door by that evening. She'd told Marcus she was passing through on her way to visit a friend in Indianapolis, keeping her voice light on the phone, doing a better job of sounding normal than I think I could have managed. He seemed pleased to see her. He made her tea. I watched him make it and my stomach turned completely over, but Carol hadn't touched a drop of anything he offered her, and she is a better actress than her high school drama teacher ever gave her credit for. We sat up until 2 in the morning after Marcus went to bed, voices low, Carol watching the footage on my laptop over and over with an expression I had never seen on my daughter's face before. When she looked up at me, her eyes were wet. She said, "Mom." Just that. I said, "I know." Then she took my hand and we sat like that for a few minutes without speaking, and eventually she said we needed a plan. The plan involved 3 things. First, I needed a doctor's appointment, not Dr. Patel, who Marcus had accompanied me to twice and whose office might mention the visit if Marcus called to check, but a new physician, someone who didn't know our household situation. Carol made the appointment that night for the following morning. Second, we needed to know what was in those pills. Third, and this was Carol's addition, practical and necessary and something I hadn't let myself think about yet, we needed to look at my finances. The doctor was a woman named Dr. Okafor, Carol's own physician when she lived in Lexington years ago. She was brisk and thorough, and when Carol explained the situation and showed her the footage on the laptop, she went completely still for a moment and then said, "Let's run a full panel." She ordered blood tests. She also called a colleague while we were still in the office, a pharmacist friend, and sent him a photo of the bottle she'd had me bring. I'd taken it while Marcus was in the shower, replaced with a different bottle so the cabinet wouldn't look disturbed. The pills were a prescription sedative, not mine, prescribed to a Thomas Willard in Cincinnati. I had never heard that name in my life. The blood results showed elevated levels of the sedative in my system and had been affecting my cognition and motor function for what Dr. Okafor estimated was at least 2 to 3 months. She used clinical language and careful phrasing, and then she looked at me directly and said, "Mrs. Harmon, what's happening to you is a crime." Having someone say those words plainly made something shift in my chest, a release, maybe, of all the second-guessing I'd been doing, all the wondering if I was overreacting. I was not overreacting. What Carol found in my finances is the part that made me sit down and put my face in my hands. Marcus had my email password. I'd given it to him in January when I was struggling to navigate some insurance paperwork and had asked for his help. He had used access to that email, combined with information he'd found somewhere in the house, account numbers, my social security number, Gerald's date of birth to reset my online banking credentials. Over the course of 11 weeks, he had transferred a total of $22,000 from my savings account into an account we would later learn was his, done in increments small enough not to trigger automatic fraud alerts. 9 transfers, ranging from $1,400 to $3,000 each. Gerald had worked for 31 years to put that money there. I am going to be honest with you about what I felt when I saw those numbers. I felt a rage, so clean and cold and absolute that it frightened me a little. Not at myself for trusting him, not at the situation. At him, specifically, for taking what Gerald built and doing it while smiling at me across the dinner table every night and sleeping in my guest room under quilts I had sewn with my own hands. That rage was useful. It kept me from coming apart, and it made me very focused. The police were contacted through Carol's attorney, a woman named Patricia, who advised us strongly not to confront Marcus directly, not to change our behavior, not to give him any indication that anything had shifted. This was the hardest advice I have ever followed in my life. For 4 days, I made conversation with Marcus at breakfast. I asked about his job search. I thanked him when he brought me my coffee and then disposed of it the moment he left the room. I sat across from him at dinner and I said please and thank you, and I watched television with him in the evenings and I did not let my face show what I knew. I thought about Gerald constantly during those 4 days. I thought about what he would have done. He was a man who felt things deeply and acted on them quickly, and I think he would have had Marcus out of the house by hour 1. But Gerald was also the person who always said I was the steady one, the one who could hold things together when everything was tilting. I held things together for 4 days, and I am not ashamed to say it cost me something. On a Tuesday morning in March, 2 police officers and Patricia came to the house. Marcus was in the kitchen. I walked in with Carol beside me. I told him that we needed to talk. He looked at the faces in the room, and something in his expression flickered, not guilt. Exactly, but a quick recalculation, the look of someone deciding what version of reality might still hold. I set my laptop on the kitchen table, and I pressed play. He watched himself powder the pills into my coffee. I watched him watch it. And for a long moment, the kitchen was absolutely silent. Then he said, and I have thought about this many times since he said, "Aunt Dorothy, I was worried about you. You weren't sleeping. You seemed so anxious all the time. I was just trying to help you rest." He said it calmly, almost gently, as though this explanation made complete sense. As though crushing prescription sedatives into someone's coffee without their knowledge every morning for months was a reasonable response to concern. He even had the expression right soft, apologetic, slightly pained, the face of someone who had been misunderstood. I had spent 4 days imagining this moment, and I had rehearsed several things I might say. I didn't say any of them. I simply asked him about Thomas Willard. The name hit him differently. The calmness slipped. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I asked him about the 9 transfers. He said nothing. His jaw tightened in a way I had never seen before, and for the first time since I had known Marcus, I saw something in his face that wasn't the pleasant, easy version he'd always shown. Patricia spoke then, and the officers stepped forward, and I took Carol's hand and we moved out of the way. What followed was not fast or clean in the way movies suggest these things are. There were hours of it, statements and paperwork and phone calls, and at some point Carol made a pot of coffee herself, real coffee, just for us, and we sat at the kitchen table and drank it while people moved through the house and documented things. At one point I looked at the spot on the counter where Marcus had stood every morning and powdered those pills, and I thought, very clearly, that I was going to need to rearrange this kitchen. I was going to need to move things around until it looked different. Small, practical, forward-facing, that has always been how I process things. Marcus was charged with multiple counts: unlawful administration of a controlled substance, elder financial exploitation, identity theft, and fraud. Patricia told me later that the financial exploitation charge carried a mandatory enhancement in Kentucky due to the victim's age, which I found both grimly appropriate and odd, being 67 has not generally come with enhancements of any kind. So I suppose I'll take this one. He pled guilty 4 months later to avoid trial. The plea agreement included restitution of the full $22,000 and a sentence of 8 years in a state facility, with eligibility for parole after 5. I sat in that courtroom with Carol on one side and Daniel, who had flown in from Portland, on the other. When the judge read the sentence, I did not feel triumph exactly. I felt something quieter than that. Something like the particular stillness that comes after a very long storm. I want to tell you something I have told very few people. In the weeks after Marcus was taken out of my house, when things were finally quiet again, I found myself going back to that footage on the laptop more than once. Not to confirm what I already knew, but because I kept trying to locate the moment where I should have seen it, the moment where I should have known. I went over conversations in my memory. I looked for signs I'd missed. I blamed myself in the way women of my generation are very well practiced at doing, because we have been told our whole lives that if something goes wrong in our household, we should have managed it better. Here is what I want to say to that. I did not miss signs because I am old or naive or because grief made me foolish. I missed them because Marcus worked very hard to make sure I would. He timed his actions carefully. He managed my perceptions deliberately. He made himself useful and pleasant and present in exactly the ways a lonely widow would find comforting. This was not carelessness on my part. This was someone expending real effort to deceive me. Those are different things, and it took me several months and a good therapist, yes. I finally made that appointment to hold them as different things. My blood pressure is normal. My thyroid numbers are where they should be. I sleep 7 hours a night and wake up in the mornings feeling like myself. Carol visits every 6 weeks now, which is both a blessing and a slight disruption to my routine, but a worthwhile one. Daniel calls on Sundays, and sometimes on Wednesdays just because. I had a new deadbolt installed on every exterior door, and a camera system that I chose myself, that records to a cloud server that only I have access to, and whose footage only I can delete. I still live in the yellow house on Birchwood Lane. The wraparound porch Gerald built is still there. I drink my coffee every morning in the kitchen, looking out at the backyard, and I think about him. And I think about the year I almost lost, and I think about how the stubbornness that Gerald always affectionately called my most exhausting quality turned out to be the thing that saved my life. I am not a woman who falls apart. I have never been that woman, and I plan to be here for a very, very long time. If you are watching this and something in my story feels familiar, a family member who has moved in and made themselves indispensable, medications you didn't take that have gone missing, finances that seem harder to track than they used to be, I am asking you to listen to that feeling, not to panic, not to accuse, but to pay attention, the way I finally paid attention. To call your daughter, or your son, or your friend, or your doctor. To trust that the feeling in your stomach that says something is wrong is not paranoia, and is not old age, and is not grief making you confused. That feeling is your mind working exactly as it should. I almost didn't listen to mine. I am grateful every single day that I did.